I had my way, everything would be so nice. This world would be like Paris. No, it would be a paradise. No one would ever have to say, I'm gonna get my wish someday. All one would have to do is say, this is my order, if you may.
Welcome to another episode of The School Without Walls. I'm Antonio Hobbs, host and founder of this educational program. Today I am more or less doing a monologue explaining some things that we have done for pre-recorded for February, Black History Month. I think this will be the 4th episode, and before I go into that, I certainly want to remind you of the purpose of this program called The School Without Walls. This program is designed primarily to develop more dialogue in the black community about self-improvement, spiritually, morally, and educationally. I repeat, regardless of what we might say, the purpose of this program is to assist African Americans to create more dialogue that might improve us spiritually, morally, and educationally. And we stress mentoring, especially of young African Americans, and we encourage the leadership, with emphasis on the African American pastor, to find persons in your community that will mentor the young people before they get into trouble. The African American family is in serious trouble now simply because of the lack of the appropriate spirituality and morality and education. Now, I'm going to talk, the next show will be talking about a roundtable discussion that my pastor had in St. Louis. He will come up later on today, or rather than say today, the next episode might be another day for you. And he's going to talk about his experience there in St. Louis. And what he did was he was a panelist on a program discussing the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. He happened to have met him when he was a youngster. He met Dr. King when the pastor was a youngster. And also we will have an episode of him talking about African American contemporary history from Montgomery, Alabama, into the present age. After that, we will have Professor Sanders, Kevin Sanders, professor here at the university. He's going to discuss two very prominent black leaders in America, and that was W.E.B. Du Bois, some say Du Bois, French, and Booker T. Washington. The question would be, which one played a more permanent role in the development of Black America? And of course, today I want to talk about several things, and one is on yesterday, under the leadership of Mr. James B. Tyson. That was an executive leadership roundtable. That was very, very good. And what they were talking about is in conjunction with what we are doing and talking about here. He had 3 young African American leaders on a panel of 3. And by the way, Mr. James B. Tyson is the Vice Chancellor of Institutional Advancement and Development here at the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. And the panelists were Leon Jones, Esquire, or Attorney Leon Jones, who has been recently appointed Director of the Arkansas Department of Labor by our new Governor Hutchinson. And Mr. Charles McGee, he was with Entergy. And Shwani Hightower, he was a strategic planner, strategic planner for Verizon Wireless. And in this discussion, I wish every youngster here on the campus could have heard them, but to give a critique of what they talked about was simply how to dress for success. And we want more dialogue in the African American community with these young men while they're young, that they must plan to be successful. And of course, dressing for success is very important. And they talked about that. Things such as the first impression is a lasting impression. And of course, you only get one chance to make a first impression. So they talked about things of that nature. And also they talked about the importance of communication. Learn to speak standard English if you want to be successful in society, where English is the principal language. We are just about concluding the first quarter of this message, and we'll be back in just a few minutes to continue talking about the Executive Leadership Roundtable under the leadership of Mr. James B. Tyson, Vice Chancellor for Institutional Advancements and Development here at the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff.
Hi, may I please have an application? Thank you.
Skip the drama. Get your diploma.
Okay.
Take that first step towards a better future. Find free adult education classes at finishyourdiploma.org.
If you have just joined us, I'm Antonio Hobbs, host and founder of this educational program called The School Without Walls. Today I'm doing a monologue, giving information and also explanations about our Black History program. Now, I want you to listen very carefully, and I wish you would take a pen and make notes, because I'm very serious about what I'm saying. History is very, very important, and many of us in the African American community don't seem to realize that, because the public school system is basically Eurocentric, and they have placed things in the curriculum with the Eurocentric community in mind. And in order to change that, we have to understand the process. First of all, you have to have the knowledge to realize the importance of your history being taught. And then you must understand that the school board, the local school board, is the power. Once you meet the needs of the state, which would be given to the district, then the school board determines what else you teach. However, in Arkansas, there is a law that says African American culture and history should be taught in the public school systems of the state. Now, if the board doesn't know that, it doesn't matter whether it's law or not, we will continue business as usual. So if you notice that it's impossible to graduate from high school in America without having a thorough knowledge or being exposed to Eurocentric history or European history, Eurocentric culture or European culture, and that's good excellent for the Europeans, and it's good for us to know but it's even better if we know that plus our own culture and history, which comes out of Africa, not out of Europe. And these are the things we're trying to get our leaders, especially the ministers, to understand, and find persons like myself who's capable of helping you to implement a curriculum in your church. Now, if we do this incorrectly, like it's done throughout America, we will start teaching African American history, really this side of slavery. And that perpetuates the myth that Africans had never contributed to civilization. It also perpetuates the myth that because of being fortunate enough, if you will, to be exposed to Europeans during the slave process, these Africans learned that their history was important too. You need to go back to Africa, where civilization first started. So my curriculum is on that order. We have already talked about the early civilization of humanity, which happened to have been in Africa, according to most scholars today. We have very few scholars dispute the fact that all humanity started in Africa, and of course moved forward to various points throughout the world, which we've already discussed, such as the most popular civilization for Europeans is the civilization that developed in southern Europe along the Mediterranean Sea in what we now call Greece and Italy and Spain. It was the Roman Empire, Greece, then the Roman Empire. Of course, that civilization was not the civilization that we have been taught. The people there were a mixture of all the people of that time, and that means they were mainly a people of color during Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato. And just like in North Africa, after the fall of the original black Africans, North Africa was a mixture of people of Europe and, of course, Africa. And, of course, we have people like the Berbers, and the Berbers were people that were a mixture. That happened on both sides of the pond, if you will, both sides of the Mediterranean Sea. Now, we are moving into now American history. We've done the history that we're coming into America. So after this break, I will talk with you about history here in America. And we want to understand that the whole truth has not been told in our public school system, because originally the purpose of the history in the history books was to enhance the children of the European settlers of this country. But now we have a lot of African Americans and other ethnic groups, but the African American group is the only group that can't readily go back to their history because they were cut off during the institution of slavery. The Chinese, the Mexicans, the Koreans, and everybody else have a straight line back to their history. So in case somebody's saying, why is it that he's putting so much emphasis on the African American history, this is the reason, is because we were disconnected for about 300 or 400 years, and that has made us a very, very peculiar and confused people. I think we have about another minute in this break. I got 2 more minutes. So what I'm going to do is start with culture and values. Culture is very important. There was a writer by the name of Stuart Hall. He said, reality is never experienced directly, but always through the cultural categories and made available by a society. This is very important to understand why we're having as many conflicts in America and in the world, is because as Americans, if we're talking as far as the world is concerned, have not given much time in understanding the cultures of the Muslims, the Arabic people. We must pay more attention to that on the national level, and I'm proud to say that I've heard on television recently that the people in power are realizing that. They say we have a cultural conflict, and some say, a spiritual conflict, a religious conflict, which we do have. And also within the nation, because of the lack of understanding other cultures, we have unnecessary conflicts. So I'm speaking directly about the culture between the African American and the European American, because that is where we're having much conflict, because I think on both sides, the lack of the proper knowledge. Culture is what is culture? It is a configuration knowledge, whether explicit or implicit, rational or irrational, that is shared by among members of an identified group. So is history. History would be the past records shared by a particular group. And this shared knowledge shapes their values and perspectives. Your culture determines what church you go to. Your culture determines how you see God. Your culture determines how you see other people. It's a learned thing. All right? How they perceive and interpret symbols and et cetera. Culture manifests as learned patterns of behavior. Whatever I am today is because of the culture I was brought up in. Whatever you are is because of the culture. And once we are isolated and not integrated, like many of us have been in this country for centuries, we have misconceived ideas about another person from something we heard. That was one of the reasons that the United States government forced desegregation in some cases and integration, is that we might have the opportunity to get acquainted with people of different cultures and learn to respect and appreciate those people. Seems like time should be just about out for this second segment. And we'll be back in just a few minutes talking about culture and the values and the behavior patterns connected with it.
Tú puedes ser un héroe al estar preparado para una emergencia. Primero, prepara un plan. Reúne a tu familia para planificar formas de cómo comunicarte con tus seres queridos después de una emergencia o planear una ruta de escape.
I am not fast.
Prepara un equipo de suministros. En caso de una emergencia, es importante contar con suficientes alimentos para 3 días. Y no te olvides de las pilas.
Low battery.
Visita ready.gov Niños para obtener más información.
Those of you who just joined us, I was talking about the importance of culture and the values. And I was saying that in lieu of the fact that we're having so many problems in our society because of the lack of knowledge of another ethnic group's culture. And the Bible teaches us that the lack of knowledge renders that nation, one generation of untrained people, render that people a nation of heathens. This is what I'm trying to get to. So people who share a culture recognize certain cliches, while people outside of that culture very, very well may not. If one, this is very important, if one expects to be accepted as a member of a group, of a culture, one must acquire the group's culture, including the ability to communicate like other members of that group. For example, to be acceptable and accepted in a group comprised of individuals of a particular occupation that is presumed to leverage respect from the larger society, one must communicate like others in that group. To be included and understood, one must use the group's code and vocabulary as well as the group's style and mode of doing things. For example, if you're living in a society where English is the standard and acceptable language, if you don't have a good English background, if you're from another ethnic group, you need to learn to speak standard English if you expect those in that culture to accept you. That does not mean that you have to abandon the language you grew up with, but you need to know when to speak it. You must be bilingual. Same thing is with dress. You might say, well, I don't want to dress Eurocentric. Then you go around with, like you got a bunch of bricks in your pants, and you are hurting yourself. You will never find anybody doing anything worth anything with his pants underneath his rump and so forth and so on, hat on backwards, sitting up in the classroom with your hat on your head. Those kinds of people are rejected in the culture. All right? So we're going to start with the Spanish. There's a Spanish, not a Spanish, there's an African proverb where the practice of looking back is valued and the culture emphasizes respect for elderly people and traditional values. There's a symbol in the African culture where they have a bird that's looking back at its tail. And that is to remind the people that in order to appreciate and understand the present, you must look back in order to understand where you are, in order to develop a future. So we're moving back into history and the importance of history. Now, we're coming from the ancient world to the USA. The next persons that are on program will be talking about things that happened this side of slavery with African Americans. However, I'm going to mention the Olmecs. Our books have just recently, our history books in America, have recently put the Olmecs of Mexico into the history books. And the Olmecs are, appear to be persons of African origin. They came to Mexico about 1200 AD, and from the Olmec came the Aztecs, and etc. So once we understand that the black Olmecs, or Olmecas in Spanish, settled what is now Central America and Mexico 1200 BC, and later on other groups came into the same area of lighter complexion. These folks assimilated, and you have the Mexicans, which means mix. Mezcla means mix, and if you notice, most of them are people of color. They're not classified as white, and that is the reason why. That's 1200 BC. Also, there's a cultural value connected with that. We have 2 more minutes. We're going to conclude here with this segment that is leading up to, which I think was episode 5, and 3 will be following. So we're talking about America, or the Americas. And of course, the Olmecas was the last one that I discussed here came to this country early. Also, before Columbus came, before Columbus, there were Africans already in this country who had mixed with what we call the Native Americans. We have history on that. My point is this: we've got to understand that the African too had a history before slavery and did contribute much to all civilization today. We just want credit for that. We're not boasting or bragging. This ends this 5th segment. And as I said earlier, the next show should be my pastor, the Reverend Alvin Smith, who will be talking about the channel discussion he had in St. Louis about the Reverend. He was on a panel in St. Louis very recently discussing his experience with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And after that, we're going to have Mr. Kevin Sanders to come discussing the difference between W.D. Du Bois's philosophy and Booker T. Washington. Thank you very kindly.